Arnold.
Hello, hello. What an
Good
honor.
morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, and for our listeners, good what time you're listening to. I hope you're well. We have the great honor today to have with us Mr. Vanderberg, Arnold Vanderberg. We have mentioned you previously in our podcast while we did a full episode on your work. And through the help of Shmuel and William, we have the honor to talk to you and hear from your mouth about your life experience, about your lessons in investments. So thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
Great, great. So, guys, we're going to start with our disclaimer and some quotes and sponsorships, and then we're going to go right into our episode. We have a lot to talk about with Arnold. He have a lot of experience with a lot of smart and insightful lessons from his long and amazing career. But let's start from the beginning. This is not an investment advice or any kind of promotion to do any kind of act as with securities. We might have positions
Position.
in the stocks that we might mention here today. So take this into consideration. This podcast is only for the purpose of giving you knowledge and general knowledge to understand, and not as an investment advice. If you do want to get investment advice, this is something that needs to be taking into account all your personal information. So be careful with that and don't use this podcast as an investment advice. And we have some sponsorship. You can see them downstairs, Interactive Israel and Passport Card. We love them a lot. And you can register for our newsletter downstairs or schedule a meeting with Yoav downstairs. After all this nonsense, let's go into the deep and interesting material that we have today. Let's start with a quote. Arnold, as we told you, we start our episode with an inspiring quote, and we'd like to give you the honor to give the first quote for the podcast.
I will prepare myself and the opportunity will come by Abraham Lincoln.
Amazing.
Okay.
I will prepare myself and the opportunity will come. Yoav, how is your podcast? How
My
is your quote?
quote
Sorry.
for today. Well, I think with Arnold on, I think it would be best to bring Benjamin Graham, who said once, and it ties into the times today. The essence of investment management is the management of risk, not the management of returns. I don't think I
Mm,
remember. And I'll say in Hebrew, Arnold, you excuse me for 1 second for some of our listeners. העיקר בניהול השקעות זה ניהול סיכונים, לא ניהול תשואות או מספרים כאלה ואחרים.
Okay, and my quote is from Howard Marks, which I'm reading his books, which is, I think I can quote the entire book and it will be a great quote. But the one I chose for today, and I think it's relevant, we are recording this episode in March 12th. It's after a few weeks that the market is being down, something around 10%, and a lot of people starting to be scary. Soon we're going to speak to Arnold about his starting day in the business when he had 8 years, right, Arnold, of
6 years of bear market.
6 years of bear market. We're going to hear about how it is to live with 6 years of the down market. But Mark's quote that I loved was, people usually say things are too good to be true. But sometimes they're too bad to be true also. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think. It's too bad to be true. It's not that bad as you think. And I think that it's also relevant in the markets. So before we start asking you questions, I want to tell our audience, I don't know if everyone heard the episode that we did on you, just to understand who is Arnold and what is his track record. Okay, I'm going to give this general information. I mean, Arnold has been around as an investment manager or advisor for 50 years and a half, right? You started in
September
1974.
74.
You started Century Investments, right?
That's
Prior
correct.
prior to that, he had a security for selling mutual funds. But if we look at the track record of Century and Arnold in the last 50.5 years for the stocks only, without regarding to bonds and other instruments, stocks only, the annual net of fees return was 13.83% per year, while the S&P 500 was 12.38. Now, to allocate you how amazing track record is this, I've calculated what would have happened if you would have gave Arnold $100,000 in 74 and kept him with his securities for 50 years and a half. Now, if you would put it in the S&P, it will turn up to be $50 million. Yoav, you want to guess how it's going to change with the Arnold's numbers?
I'm guessing at around 50% more, something like that.
100% more.
Wow.
100% more. It would be $100 million, twice the amount that the S&P would have given you for this time.
Assuming reinvestment of dividends and not paid any fees, which is even more difficult. So Arnold, that feat is amazing.
This is an amazing track record, amazing track record. And it came with a beautiful and amazing and inspiring story with it. It's very difficult to explain to people today how difficult it is to maintain such a strong track record for so long. I mean, we've talked here about a lot of investors that would beat the market for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. But to be able to do it for 50 years, you need the discipline that is simply amazing. And let's try to learn from Arnold about what helps him achieve this goal. So, Arnold, if I would like to start at the beginning, okay? You started selling a mutual fund in 68, right? I'm correct?
That's correct.
And this was
my license at March 68. The market peaked out in December. So I got it just right, the top of the market.
So you started at the top of the market.
Place, the worst time you could start.
Tell us a little bit about it. Why is it so worst? What happened there?
Well, what happened is that I didn't do very well in high school as a student. I never went to college. I never had any training in this. But I started off working in a gas station. Then I went into a print shop. And then I started working for a financial company that sold mutual funds and insurance. And when I started studying the track records of the mutual funds at the top of the market, it just was mesmerizing. I mean, all the returns were great. Everybody looked like heroes. Everybody was having a good time. I just figured it was just the best time for me to start a new career. And so I went through the mutual funds training, and I picked about 15 funds. So when I got a client, I would put 15 different funds into his portfolio. And I didn't know anybody with money. The only people I knew was people from my high school. They didn't have much money, small funds. But no sooner did I get started that the market started down. This was the time when Buffett was retiring his private funds. So just to top it off, the worst time to start when he was retiring. So anyway, the market started down, and it just went down until 70. And then there was a little burp up for a year and a half, and then it came straight down into 74. And by that time, it was 6 years of straight down. It started at 1,050, and it ended up at 575 on the Dow. So that was a huge decline. And the small cap stocks really almost got obliterated. So as I was going through this and analyzing it and agonizing of how the people were losing money, I noticed something that was really the beginning of the thinking. And what happened is I was laying out all the funds, and 7 or 8 of them did exceptionally well. Not that they made money, but they didn't lose as much as the other ones. Some of the other ones just went off the map. So I started thinking, how come these 7 or 8 did very well, And how come these other ones did so bad? They're all professional money manager. How could this happen? They're all professionals. It's like if you have a group of doctors and, some of them are great and some of them aren't, what's the difference? So I started calling them and talking to them and reading their material. And every one of them who had done well belonged to the school of Benjamin Graham. So I never heard of the guy. I said, who is this guy? Well, he's the father of security analysis, and give me all the background and so on and so forth. So I started reading everything I could get my hands on Benjamin Graham. And it was really his last statement, if you don't mind me reading it, that really got me to thinking. So this is what he said when Benjamin Graham was retiring. A final retrospective thought. When the young author entered Wall Street in June 1914, no one had any inkling of what the next half century had in store. Yet, if we confine our attention to American investment experience, there is some comfort to be gleaned from the last 57 years. Through all their vicissitudes and casualty, as earth-shaking as they were unforeseen, it remained true that sound investment principles produce sound, generally results. We must act on the assumption that they will continue to do so. So here's a guy that started right before the First World War. Then he went through the Depression. Then he went through the Second World War, 14 recessions, and all during this lifetime, you had all these things that you couldn't predict. And this is one of the most important principles. One of the most profound lessons to be taken from Graham's writing is that nobody could have predicted these events, just like nobody can predict the major events of tomorrow. As John Maynard Keynes said, the inevitable never happens. It's always the unexpected. Successful investing is not dependent on the ability to predict the future, but rather on using sound investment principles, as they will produce sound investment results.
Let's stop for a minute and repeat this last sentence, because I think that every one of us should tattoo this sentence on our hearts. Sound,
especially today.
Exactly. Sound investments, what's the exact quote? Principles create sound investments results?
That's right. And we must act as if that will continue in the future. Now, don't forget, he went through the first...
Just one sec. I want people to let it to sink in. Sound investments principles will produce sound investments result and will continue to do so without regards to external events. I think this is something that is so powerful, and I would like to ask you a question about those years, because when you talked to me before about it, I've noticed something you said. You talked about that you felt not so good during those years because you sold to all your friends and all your people investments that lost money. And you're very, very obsessed to understand why did it happen and how to do it correct. Tell us a little bit about this, please.
Well, what happened, these were all small investors, and some of the funds did okay, and the other ones got clobbered. But I thought to myself, there's got to be something to this. How come somebody can do it the right way and other people don't do it the right way? So I read everything.
I'm sorry to hold you once again, because I want to emphasize this point.
Okay.
I think there is a great lesson here that we can learn from you, because I think a lot of people in those times just said, okay, it's bad times, this one goes down, the other one go down, let's do something else. But you're wanting to understand, to try to figure out what makes things work correctly. This kind of heart, this kind of pursuit gave you the ability to go in depth and to understand the inning meaning and eventually help you create those great results. So I think we should take notice of your heart, of really wanting to understand things, to pursue the truth, to truly understand how things work. This is, I think, a key factor in your path to success.
Let me just say one thing. I had a revelation one time, during that time, very difficult time. And I was studying religion. You know, I was raised Jewish, and my folks before the war were Orthodox. And we had all these discussions about religion. And then I get into talking to other people about religion. And, you know, we even got, my dad and I went to the rabbis and talked about, had these things. But the most important thing is, as I was trying to understand it, I was sitting there with the Bible and trying to figure things out for myself. And all of a sudden, a thought hit me. It flashed in my mind. It says, if you want to pursue the truth, you have to go wherever it leads you. No preconceived idea. And that had such a profound impact on me that I've applied it to everything I've ever done.
Let's repeat that again. It's very important. Let's repeat. If you want to pursue the truth, you must.
If you want to pursue the truth, you have to go wherever it leads you.
Wherever it leads you. Amen.
Yes. And so that involves a lot of integrity. And I have a tremendous lesson on integrity and truth. And I'd like to share it with you, because it's the most important thing for an analyst, to be able to discern the truth. And in order to discern the truth, you have to love the truth. You have to pursue it wherever it takes you, no matter what, whether it goes against anything you ever believed. You have to be open-minded like a blank slate and let it come to you. So what happened is, whenever I would go astray, my dad would say to me, Arnold, you need to read The Brother Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And I was in high school. I wasn't doing very well. And I looked up on the book. It was 200 or 300 pages. I never read a book with 200, 300 pages. I said, I'm not reading that one. Anyway, every time I got into trouble, he said, you need to read The Brother Karamazov. So one day, many years afterwards, 20 years afterwards, I'm in a bookstore with my wife. She's looking for some books for the kids. And I see this big bookcase with all blue books. And I thought, I look at them, they're all different titles, but they're the same color. I thought, why would they do that? Well, it was a competitor of Cliff Notes, where they make short versions of classical books. So I look through and I see The Brother Karamazov, and it's only 60 pages. And I thought, oh my God, that's my style. I'm going to go read that. So I read I went through the Cliff Notes of Brother Karamazov, and it really struck me. And this is so profound, it's affected me the whole time. Let me just read it to you. So Dostoevsky was in a prison, and if you think Auschwitz was bad, he was in the Gulag for 5 years. Now think about a guy being in the Gulag, Russian Gulag, for 5 years, and he was a writer. And the thing that really hit him is that the people who could deal the best with the inhumane conditions were the people of high integrity, character. He said character was the defining thing for survival. And he promised himself that if he got out of the Gulag, he would write plays and show what happens if you think a certain way and how your life ends up. So he came up with the rule. He said, I called it the anatomy of a lie. And the anatomy of a lie is, if you lie, you lose your ability to discern the truth in yourself and other people. Now, what could be more important for an analyst or a money manager to be able to discern the truth in himself and other people? So that's what happens. When you lie, you lose that ability to discern the truth in other people. When you lie, you lose respect for yourself and other people. And as you lose respect for yourself and other people, you lose the ability to love. And when you lose the ability to love, you become very empty and you pursue all the coarse pleasures of life, sex, drugs, gambling, all these other things. And eventually it leads to depravity. And it all started with a lie. So the cornerstone of everything in being able to do and see the truth is to pursue the truth for its own sake, no matter what happens. And that is something that I believe in more than anything. You have to pursue the truth, and it'll come to you. It'll come to you in flashes. It's just amazing. So that's an important part of being a good money manager, is to be totally truthful and honest. And the thing that I noticed, I've had so many experiences where people would ask me questions about things which were not favorable, make you look bad or something like that, but I always said, whatever it is, you tell the truth. I'll give you an example. I was referred to a man who was a very successful businessman one day, and a broker recommended him to him. So he came in, and he was a very nice guy, very smart, and he was telling me that he sold his business a while back. And he wanted me to explain to him what my method was. I said, the single most important thing is to understand value, to understand what something is worth, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in stocks, whether it's in gold. Anything you do has a way of developing the value. And that's the main mission. He said, well, that's interesting. I sold my business. And he said, I said, well, give me the parameters of it, the sales, the cash flow, the earnings, the book value, and so forth. He gave it to me. And he said, now, can you tell me whether I got a good deal or not? So I pulled out my industry statistics and I compared them to what he was paid for his business. And I thought, oh my God, this guy got screwed. I mean, he sold his business for a lot less than it was worth. So now I'm sitting across the prospective client and I said, that's not going to go over very well when I tell him that he didn't get a good deal or he got screwed. So I said to myself, I'm still going to do it because that's the principle. You tell the people the truth. I said to him, Ray, I hate to tell you this, but something was wrong in this transaction because they took advantage of you. You did not get a good price for your business. He sat there quietly, and then he put his head down and he said, Arnold, I know that happened, and I'll tell you how it happened. He said, my business was doing great one year. We're at the top of the market. It was going great. Everybody wanted to buy it, and I thought it was worth more, so I didn't sell it. And then the recession came, and I got to the point where I was only a couple of hours away from going bankrupt. And then fortunately, things turned. And as soon as the market turned, I went to the people who made me that offer, even though I thought it was a little ridiculous. I didn't want to have to go through this again, so I took it. I made enough money. I could retire. I'm in good shape. But you're 100% right about your evaluation. So I'd like to open up an account with you. If I hadn't have told him the truth, if I'd have tried to soft pedal that, he might have said, well, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. So the important thing is always stick with the truth. I had another example where a man came to me.
Let's try to go back to the story. I mean, we can talk about hours for many, many things, but I would like us to go to understand, again, your process in building Century and your business investment philosophy. So I think we understand that is this the pursuit of truth in all cost make you choose and understand to go deep to understand the mutual fund industry and how they work, and what make people some people be successful, and you find about Graham and his work. Then tell us, what did you do? I mean, when you understood this as Century, when you start to understand that people have, some of the mutual funds are better than others, and all of the ones who are better are using Graham's philosophy. So what was your next step?
Well, I studied Graham, and one of his principles was that you decide on the value of a company by the private market value. So he said one of the great indicators is, what do people willing to pay for this company? Sophisticated people who understand business. I don't know how it works in Israel, but in our country, in real estate, when you go to appraise a home, the broker comes out, he looks at comparable sales, he figures out one is a 3-bedroom, one's a 5-bedroom, one's got a pool, and he makes comparable comparison, and that's how they come up with the value of your real estate. In the stock market, you look at comparable, you do the same thing in comparables. If you're buying a retailer, it sells at a certain multiple of sales, it sells a certain multiple of free cash flow, it sells a certain multiple of books, it sells at a multiple of dividends. And if you group them all together, you get a very good idea of what people pay for a retailer. Then if you go into industrial manufacturing, you have different parameters.
When you talk about people pay, you talk about the private market, right?
Yes. So Benjamin Graham
let me explain it for a minute to our listeners to make sure they understand it. I think what Arnold is saying is that the stock market is infected with many non-sophisticated reasons for doing transactions. People used to buy emotionally, they buy because they must, because they just need to invest their money, there are many conflicts of interest. So if you want to truly understand the value of a company, the right price to pay for a company, you should go and look what private professional people will willing to pay and how are they assess the price of a company.
That's right. So you have comparables. There used to be a great service that I subscribed to before Merrill Lynch bought it, and it was a terrific service. They would take every acquisition for the year. They would group it by industry, by whether it was paid for cash, whether it was paid
every
by
private interaction, private.
Yeah, every one that was bought out, okay? So when there was an acquisition, they would take all the statistics, and I grouped them together, and I subscribed to the service. And so every time I saw an acquisition, even if they didn't list it, I would cut the paper out. On the weekend, I'd go and run all the ratios, and I would group it in there. So after a while, after many years, I saw the relationship between what people, sophisticated investors would pay for a company and what the company sold for. But here's the trick. I noticed at the peak of the market, the average acquisition was 24 times earnings. At the bottom of the market, the average acquisition was 13 times earnings. But it was
I can share this slide, right? This is the slide that you send us?
Which one? Oh,
I think it's this one, right? You sent us this one that shows it, right?
But I don't see it.
Price earnings multiple.
Yeah, those are earnings multiples on the value line, a median PE. And that's over the 50-year history. I keep it every week. Every week I record that multiple that comes out. Now, that is a much better way of looking at the market than the S&P and all the other ones, because the S&P, for the last 5 years, the top 7 companies have driven the S&P. You can't do this with the Value Line Index because it's 1,700 companies, and it's a median PE. It's the midpoint. So you don't get these distortions. Matter of fact, if you look at that indicator, you can see that it usually bottoms at 10, and it peaks at 21 to 22. And the times it hit 21 or 22, I also gauge how long it stays there, and it's not more than 6 months. So when you get into the 18.5 to 21 PE on the value line, you're getting near the peak of a market. And so what I did is I would take all the industries, I would compare them to the value line median PE, see how they changed. Now, here's the thing. In the S&P, the top of the market was 24 times earnings, where in the value line, the highest was 21 to maybe 22 for a few months. Average probably 20. But at the bottom, they're consistently at about 10. But if you look at the far left corner, you can see at the period when I started the business that the PE went down as low as 4, and the high was 8 or 9. That was because of the 12% inflation we were experiencing. So in a normal environment where you have 2-3% inflation, the value line trades between 10 and 20. At the high inflation, it goes to the extreme. Now, at the bottom of 74, I started Century Management 3 months before the bottom. And I was so convinced, I had such strong convictions that we were near the bottom, because Benjamin Graham talked about the valuation of the companies. He said it was as cheap as the Great Depression. So when you look at the Value Line Index over 50 years and you see the top is 20 and usually the bottom is 10, and now you're selling at 4 to 8, you know you're at an extraordinary time. Even in the 2008 to 2009 crisis, the value line never got lower than 10. So when you get to 10 in a normal environment, you're in good shape. When you're at 18 to 20, that's when you start to look a little the other way. So what I did is I grouped all the companies together and I specialized in certain industries to make sure I truly understand it. And then as you talk to the companies and you read their 10Ks and different things of that nature, you get a better feel of the industry, you learn the industry. And so what I did is I realized at the bottom of 74, the companies were paying 13 times earnings, but the average stock was selling at 4 to 5 times earnings. Why was that? Because there's a rule that companies have to pay fair value. And so they were paying twice as much as what the companies were worth in the market. However, on a regular basis, they were paying 13 times when normally it goes at 20 to 22 to 24 times. So they were buying bargains. But can you imagine, after 6 years of bear market, I was able to buy stocks at 4 to 6 times earnings with 7% dividend yield, with great balance sheets and decent growth rates. And so it was just like a kid in a candy shop. The only problem is I didn't have many clients and I didn't have much money. So I bought what I could and I just stuck with it. And as our performance really picked up, just to show you, my first 10 years in the business, I averaged 19.5%, and I outpaced the S&P by about 4.5 to 5%. And I was getting all these new clients from people who were in the Nifty 50. At that time, the average stock was selling at 40 to 60 times earnings. It was the Nifty 50 area of the 70s. And people would say, geez, I've got a great money manager. He buys the best companies. They're just not making much money because they were overvalued. And I was buying stocks at 4 to 5 and 6 times earnings with 7% dividend yield. So we had a great performance for the first 10 years. And that helped obviously set the reputation and get referrals and so on and so forth.
Does that remind you, Gilad,
yes,
what I must have a question. It just reminds me so much of today. Arnold, does this time kind of remind you of the investment climate right now in the U.S.? I mean, with the Nifty 50, the Magnificent 7, do you see many similarities?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I keep many other indicators, but I can tell you that the U.S. market is the most overvalued in 50 years. So, the value line right now is about 18.5. It got as high as 19. It's in the upper zone, but it's not like in 2000 where it was just crazy. So the average premier company is still selling a little bit below the Nifty 50. But you got to remember, the Nifty 50, we might never see that again because that's once in 50 years. So we're up at that upper zone, and our portfolios are designed for this kind of a market. I believe.
Okay, we'll go to the current value of the current strategy that you hold in the soon. It's very interesting, but I want to keep our line, our chronological line. So basically, then you understand Graham, you understand value, you understand prices, and you need to not look at the stock, but to the price of the stock, and you start do it. But since then, since the 17, we had a few cycles. We have the 80s, we have the 90s, we have the beginning of 2000, where the markets were peaking and overpriced. And as we talked about in our podcast about many value investors that were working in that time, it's a great challenge. Because if you don't buy the overpriced stock during those times, you're outperforming and your clients are disappointed. And you know that you don't want to buy them because they're overpaying. And you've been like 3 or 4 such periods. How did you manage to deal with that as a money manager in those times?
Well, I can give you one of the most trying times. It was in 87. The market was going crazy, and I couldn't find values. And no matter what happened, my other stocks were getting overvalued. And while it never happened before, I was almost in 50% cash. And I was underperforming very badly. And people were starting to leave me. And one of my most greatest investors and mentor came to me, took me out to lunch, and he says, Arnie, I just went to a seminar where there's a great money manager, and he's just, really doing a great job. And he told us that the next 4 years were going to be great, that most people don't understand it, and there's just going to be a great time. And as I sat and listened to him, I got the feeling that he was being very nice to me. He was always a great mentor and a great businessman, and he was trying to help me to say, maybe you shouldn't be in this much cash. So I said to him, the only thing I can go with is the valuation of the companies. And while that's happened in the past, it's very uncomfortable right now, but I'm going to have to stick to it because that's what I believe, and that was imprinted in me when I saw the 74 decline. So I all of a sudden had an epiphany. I thought, this might cause me to go out of business. I mean, I may lose enough business to where I can't stay in business. And then a thought hit me. If you want to do the right thing, you have to pursue the truth. And so to me, I decided, even if I have to go out of the business, I'm not going to change. Well, you won't believe it, but 2 or 3 weeks later, the market dropped 23% in one day.
Wow. Yeah,
And
it was the Black Monday. But before that, I want to stop and repeat what you said because it's amazing. You said that you were losing clients, you were outperforming, but you chose to go with your truth and your discipline and what you believe in, even if it means that you will lose your business. And eventually it came through. So it's again this motive, this repeating motive of seeking the truth, that it looks like you're going to lose everything. It looks like you are doing the worst thing that you can, and you still do it, and it pays you to stay loyal to your principles and to the truth that you believe in. And you it's not just that you believe in, that you think it's true, that you pursued and willing to lose everything for, and success. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing story.
well, the thing about it is, what I learned is belief is the single most important thing that a human being can have. There's nothing more powerful than belief. Belief creates miracles. And once you are convinced of that, you will stick to it no matter what happens. I mean, people are willing to give their lives for the truth. I'll give you an example. The people who hit my parents during the war, they risked their life. If the Germans would have caught them with my parents, they would have all gone to Auschwitz. A girl that was 17 years old smuggled me through the German lines with a fake passport. If she would have been caught, she would have been sent to Auschwitz, and so would I. So after the war, I called her and I said, what in the world made you do that? That you would risk your life for somebody you haven't even seen before? She says, Arnold, that was our belief. And that's what really settled me when I was studying religion and I wanted to find the truth. I realized that the single most important thing is belief in what you stand for. And you have to do that irrespective of the consequences. But the good news is the truth always wins out. if you stick with the truth and you do what you honestly believe is right, you will gain tremendous confidence and strength. And during that one day when the market was down 23%, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was buying
Again,
a lot of
for the
stock.
second time.
Yeah. Now, I'll give you an example. Because we got to talking about it the other day, I ran a performance, which you asked me, well, what would you do during the 2000 era when the market went crazy? Well, for the first 5 years, from 94 to 98, we underperformed the market by 12%. For example, if I averaged the 5 years, it was 1169. The market averaged 24%, and we were down 12% over the 5 years. The next 5 years...
Again, can you repeat the numbers so we can understand?
From 94 to 98, that was the first 5 years of that period, I underperformed the market by 12%.
Total, not
per
annual,
year,
right?
per year, I think.
Yeah,
Per year or annually?
Annually.
Annually. Wow, 12% annually for 4 years in a row. Wow.
Right. Now, here's the next 5 years. We did 21%, and the market, this is the 2000 bubble, only performed during those 5 years 0.61%. So we outperformed by 21%. If I
For
put
how
the
long?
10 years, 21%.
For how long? For how long?
5 years.
Wow. This is amazing.
If I average them together, we average 16.3% versus the S&P for 11. So we outperformed over the 10 years for 5%. So that's how you make it.
Wow. We need to repeat it and understand it and really, really go carefully because this is amazing story. You said 94 to 98, you're minus 12% annually. 98 to 2003, you're plus 20% annually. And the total for the 10 years, you're plus 5% annually.
Yeah,
so
now
this
look
is, if you are willing to go through fire, you
That's tough.
receive the heavens.
Well, let me give you an example. 2000 was a bad year for the S&P, right?
Oh, a little bit.
We were up 43%. The S&P was down 9%. So that 1 year, we outperformed by 52%.
Wow.
And then in 2001, we were plus 10%. The market was down 11%. So we outperformed by 21%. The next year, we went down 0.43%, but the market went down 22%, so we outperformed by 21%. And the worst thing that happened to me is in 98, when we were only up 2% and the market was up 28%. Can you imagine talking to clients that you were, after 3 or 4 years of bad underperformance, and now the last year, you're only up 2% and the market's up 28%? What do you tell people?
What to tell us? What did you tell people? How did you handle it? Because I think about it, I'm scared.
It's probably happened to you lately as well, Arnold, I assume, with your careful investing mythology.
Yeah. So the point, my point is that if you study history, whether you go back to Graham and you go back all the way, you learn there are cycles in the market, and they're pretty consistent if you look at the long run. You always have to look at the long run. The short run means nothing. First of all, as I pointed out in Benjamin Graham's story, he went through all these different things and nobody would have predicted them. But he didn't have to predict them. He just had to buy things right. So you have to do what's right. That's the thing. You do what's right and you stick with it and you have the faith. And you know, there's another thing I learned about history. The bad people always get it in the end. Good always prevails. So if you're on the wrong side of things, but you're doing the right thing, eventually you get paid. And I can't even begin to tell you how many times, when I'm talking to clients, they understand when you believe in something and you stick with it and it proves to be correct. And so one of the things that I learned in my sports career as a rope climber, it's a long story, but I went through hell because I came out of the war so weak. You saw some of the pictures from the war that I sent you on the video, and you can see that at age 6 or 7, I could barely walk. I had to crawl when my parents picked me up from the orphanage. I was so malnutrition. Then I had problems mentally and physically, and I took up rope climbing, and I was just terrible for 2 or 3 years.
We'll go into all this story in a few
Okay.
minutes. It's a very important story, and I think it's probably one of the sources for your ability to pursue the truth in such conviction over very, very bad times. But I want to go now maybe to the late years. I mean, that Yoav was asking about. How are you coping with your investment in the last market, in the last 5 years, in these days when people, when you have such a high pricing in the markets? How do you handle the last years, the last few years?
I handle it the same way I always do. I only stick with things that make sense, and I try to explain why I believe this way and all of these different lessons that we've learned over the last 50 years. And, you know, I have some clients going back to 40 years. So a lot of people are with us that have been with us for many years. And so they understand that you fluctuate. With newer clients, it's a little more difficult. But our portfolio in the last few years, while we've underperformed, have been coming back very strongly. And the reason is that we are of the opinion, it's our personal opinion, don't quote me on anything like that, but our personal opinion is that we are going into an area, a cycle, where commodities are going to be the single best performing asset class around. So we are 6% in gold. We are 15% in oil and natural gas. I believe that natural gas is going to be the big winner of the next 5 years. And I have many studies to prove that, but that's our position in. And so we've been actually doing pretty good, not keeping up with it, but I have we're only down about 2 or 3% per year for a few years. And it's coming back. I think our 5-year record is going to be about equal to the S&P. But we've had 2 or 3 years of serious underperformance. But, you know, when you go through a 6-year bear market and you go through a period of 5 years like that, you just realize that that's part of the thing. And my philosophy is I never wanted to build a big company. The single most important thing to me was to be financially independent so I could always do what I believed was right. And I didn't care if I made a lot of money. Now, it turns out I made a lot of money because you always do when you do the right thing. So you can't miss in this business if you commit yourself. And let me give you one quote that I started the meeting with. I will prepare myself and the opportunity will come. Can I share you how that quote came about?
Definitely.
Could you take the chart off so I could see you guys?
Yeah, sorry. I forgot.
We'll
Okay.
send it in the show notes for our...
Yeah. So here's the thing. So I didn't have a good track record when I first started. I didn't have an official degree like a CFA. I had no credentials, and I had very little money. So it was kind of hard to get a client, if you can appreciate that, to say the least. So I got a referral to a person who was a very successful businessman. And we started talking, and I told him about my philosophy about Benjamin Graham and all that. And he kind of said, you know, Arnold, I appreciate you. You've been highly recommended. They tell me you're an honest person. We could trust you and, you know, and so on and so forth. But I can't, as a businessman, I can't give you any money because you don't have a track record. I mean, the very least, I don't care if you have a degree, but I have to see some results. So, you know, was a very nice guy, was very nice about it. I thanked him for his time and I left and I went back to the office and I was very depressed because I thought to myself, how am I ever going to get clients if I don't have the time to get the track record going. It's going to take time. So as I was sitting there, I had a part-time girl working for me, and she comes in with all her whole arm full of mail. And I saw the annual report starting to slip out, so I went to help her. And here's what happened, which was truly amazing. This magazine hit like this, flipped around, and landed like this. And there was a big quote on the bottom of it. It said, "I will prepare myself and the opportunity will come." And I thought, that's the answer. I'm trying to get business when I'm not qualified. I'm going to devote myself to not worrying about getting the business. I'm just going to study and dedicate myself. I'm going to become the best I can be. And then I trust Abraham Lincoln. If I'm well prepared, the opportunities will come. And I can tell you the opportunities came in the strangest way. If I told you some of the ways that I got business, it has nothing to do with marketing. It's just mental. Making money is mental. It's all mental.
Amazing,
If
amazing.
you study the subconscious mind, if I can introduce a thought here, can I do that?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I've been studying the quantum computer, right? Because the quantum computer that they're working on is going to be 158 million times faster than the fastest computer on the planet. Now think about this. Think about the fastest computer. This thing's going to be 158 million times faster. But that's not the most exciting thing. The most exciting thing is that when I was reading how the quantum computer calculates and how the subconscious calculates, I thought, my God, I think the subconscious is a quantum computer. So I thought, well, how am I going to prove this? So I started Googling physicists, and I found this physicist, Matthew Fisher, who was one of the leading physicists in the country, who was suggesting that the subconscious mind is a quantum computer. That means in between your earphones, you got a quantum computer in between your ears. Now, what else do you need to know? That means if you have a quantum computer between your ears, you can program anything you want in your life and it's going to happen. I guarantee it. Now, let me give you the example of that. I have a guy that studied the subconscious mind like I did for 50 years. And I can give you his quote. And he basically says, well, let me read it to you. Here's what his conclusion of the subconscious mind is. First, you are the architect of your destiny. Every experience or condition in your life, poverty or riches, success or failure, health or illness, is the result of action of purpose and most set by you. Second, within the area of your life, you have creative power. You can make a mental image or a blueprint of the progress and expansion you want to achieve. And by impressing the content of your objective upon your subconscious mind, you can cause the condition you visualize in your mind to be created. Creative energy is the self-induced action of the mind upon itself.
I think, Arnold, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's a little bit complicated for our listeners to understand at the moment because you're giving a lot of information too fast, not in their native language. So I think it's interesting, it's comprehensive, but I think we need to do it a little bit piece by piece. So I want you, please, maybe to start a little bit more with your life story. We haven't covered that yet. I mean, the way that you came to those conclusions about truth, about the subconscious, about the ability of the mind was not from theory, was your own practice in life. And you've been through a lot. So let's go a little bit about your life experience and how you were able to overcome hardship with those capabilities. So as you mentioned before, you were born in Holland, and you were a kid during the Holocaust, and your parents went to Auschwitz, and they smuggled you away from there, so you were in a foster family, right? And places like this?
Well, what happened is my parents were hidden by a Dutch people who were Christians. Their name was Bunt, family Bunt, and they hid my folks, but they couldn't keep me and my brother there because I was 2.5 years old, and the Germans would come through and search the house. They had a fake room there where my folks were hidden behind a wall.
But you were born near Anna Frank's house, right?
Yes, I was born right down the street from Anne Frank. She lived at the 700 block. We lived at, no, we were at 823 and she was at 267 on the Prinsengracht in Holland.
Amazing.
And so my folks were hidden just like the Franks family. They were hidden in a fake room, but they couldn't keep us there because if we cried, it was hard to keep me quiet. They still have the same problem, keeping me quiet. But anyway, at 2.5 years old, they had to find another place for us to stay because it would give the family away. So they moved us. My mom and dad had a maid and they had some parents. And so we stayed at their farm for a while, but they couldn't handle it with the Germans coming around. They were scared about it. So they gave it up. So my parents had to find somebody to take us. And the Dutch underground had a 17-year-old girl. I thought she was 19, but she's actually 17. And she took the job of getting me on a train to go to the orphanage. And it was a Dutch orphanage. So what happened is they had to give her a fake passport because when you get on the train, they check your passport and Jews didn't have passports. So it was a real bad rendition. And so what they did is they put a guy in front of us to keep the guard busy while he was checking the passport. So the German officer came on, he would ask for the passport and he started talking to him. He could speak German and kept him busy. And then the whistle blows and the officer has to get off the train. So his goal was to keep him busy enough to where they wouldn't have enough time to check our passport, which was successful. So he didn't check the passport and we got on. But this girl was risking her life. If they would have caught her, she'd have been gone in Auschwitz. So anyway, we got to the orphanage okay. But my parents didn't know when we would get to the orphanage because there wasn't a phone where they were hidden. So they said a neighbor was going to call the orphanage was going to call the neighbor. And as soon as the neighbor found out that we made it, they would tell my parents. So the train ride should have been about 45 minutes to an hour. And it turns out that after 2 hours, my mom and dad were getting worried because they thought maybe something went wrong.
They were not in Auschwitz yet, your parents?
No, they were hidden by the people. Mm-hmm. So my mom kept talking to my dad, we got to go to the butcher shop down the street because they have a phone and then I can call the orphanage to see if Arnold and they got there. And so my dad says, Manya, we can't go on the street. The Germans are all over. If they catch us, the kids will no longer have a parents. We'll be sent to Auschwitz. So she said, okay. But after 3 or 4 hours, she told my dad, you go, I have to find out what happened. And if you don't go with me, I'm going by myself. So my dad said he had no choice. He couldn't let her go by himself. He had a terrible feeling about it. He just knew they were going to get caught. And sure enough, the lady, the wife of the butcher was a traitor. They turned Jews in for 15 guldens and some food stamps. And so they turned him in. And when they got out of the butcher shop, the Gestapo was there and they arrested him and sent him to Westerbroek. And then a few days later, they sent him on a train to Auschwitz. So my parents never knew whether we made it or not. And my mom said to me, the most punishing thing in Auschwitz was not the cold and the beatings and all the conditions. It's having to think every night, I wonder if the kids made it.
Wow. It's inconceivable. How they did survive Auschwitz?
Well, it's interesting. My parents, if I told you how my mom survived, it would be hard to believe. Uh, my dad was a very strong-willed person with great character. I think my dad had incredible character, and he laid it on the line all the time. But anyway, the thing that my dad told me, and that's where I got my first inclination about the power of the mind. He was on a death march, and the death march was they were evacuating the Auschwitz because the Germans wanted to get the Jews out of there so they wouldn't be caught, you know, with all the atrocities they were doing. So they were moving the people to different camps. So they started the death march. It was sub-zero weather. The weather was the coldest month in January. The weather is 25 to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So
Yeah, just for our Israeli listeners, it's
below zero.
Like 5 below zero, something like this.
Yeah. So anyway, he said they had regular clothes on, no warm clothes. Some people didn't even have shoes or good shoes. And you had to march. And if you didn't keep up with the group, they beat you. And if they beat you, you felt you went down. And if you went down and you didn't get up, they'd shoot you. So he said to himself as he was starting, Hugo, what's the single most important thing I can do in this march? And he said, I had to make sure that I didn't fall down, because if you fell down and the beating was so bad that you couldn't get up, he said people wouldn't want to get up. So he said he took his foot and he put his foot down, he tested it to make sure it wasn't slippery. Then he locked his knee, and then he moved his other foot. And he said he was so focused on moving his leg that he couldn't think of anything else. He didn't think about how hungry he was, how cold he was, how far he had to go, how angry he was. Only one thought: move the leg. Put the leg down and move the leg. And he went that way for hours at night, just marching in the cold. And he said, so I said, Pa, how did you get through that? I mean, I was an athlete, and that looked pretty tough for me to do. He said, Arnold, there's something about the mind that we do not understand. He said, but there's something about it, because the more I focused myself, the more I got energy. And I never thought I could move my leg again, but when I thought about it, I was able to do it and get the energy. I said, well, what was it about the mind? He said, I don't know what it is. I'm not a psychologist, but I can tell you there is something we don't understand about the mind. Well, that stuck in my mind, that I never forgot that. I haven't forgotten it since. And that is the fact, what is it about the mind that can give you that kind of power to be able to withstand those kind of atrocities? And so I studied and studied and studied it. But my first indication of the real truth of this matter was that I graduated from high school. I got married my high school sweetheart for 4.5 years we were together, and 4.5 years we were married, about 8 or 9 years. And then she left, and I was very depressed. I went through a deep depression after that, and I was just starting my business. And so I couldn't work beyond 3:30. I got so tired at 3:30 that it was like 3:30 in the morning. So one day I was thinking about it, and I read this article that if you hypnotize yourself and you go into a hypno nap, 20 or 30 minutes under a hypno nap is the equivalent of 3 hours sleep. So I got very excited. I thought, my God, if I can do this every day, I can work 3.5 hours more. Well, I bought the book, How to Hypnotize Yourself by Leslie Lacron. It's a very old book, but it's a great book. I started reading it, and in 10 days, I was able to hypnotize myself and go out every day at 3:30, and I could work not only 3 hours, I could work until 10:30 at night, and I still had energy. So that got me to thinking, it's got to be something about the subconscious. I started learning about the subconscious mind. Anyway, long story short, I went to a psychiatrist because I was so depressed. And I told him how I was able to keep going because I hypnotized myself. He says, that's a brilliant way to do it, Arnold. But let me ask you, aren't you interested in finding out why you're depressed? I said, yeah, that's the reason I'm here. He said, okay, that's what we're going to work on. So the long story short is the reason I was so depressed is not only because my ex-wife left with another guy, which is never a good thing for the male ego. I was very angry about that, but I had a lot of anger about a lot of other issues. So through therapy, I learned how to get rid of the anger and how to forgive and all of these kind of things. Now, let me give you one thing that he said to me that literally changed my life. I was telling him about my rope climbing career, coming from a very weak kid to being a championship rope climber, setting the school record and setting the league record, winning 9th in the nation in the national AAU contest with all college seniors. I was telling him this story about how that happened, and I was using, he said, you know, I teach sports psychology, and all the things you did were the same things that we teach. He said, now here's the secret. If you will take the same principles that you apply to sports and you apply it to your business is going to be just as successful. And as soon as he said that, my right arm got chills. Whenever something profound hits me, my right arm lights up. And I knew that what he said was the truth. And I went home that day. I cleaned out my apartment. I had a studio apartment, took everything out, put all my books about the market on there, made a commitment that I wasn't going to do anything but study and build my business. And
Okay. Let me try to summarize because you covered a lot of things. All of them are very, very important and interesting and meaningful, but it's difficult for people to understand what you give them so
I'm
much
sorry.
information. No, it's okay. It's okay. But let's try to recap and understand what you said because it's very, very important. First, you said that your parents, while in Auschwitz, without knowing the fate of their children, survived mainly by the power of their mind. The power of the mind, your father focusing in the death march, gave him something somewhat of supernormal capabilities to survive such horrible and inconceivable situation, walking sub-zero temperature for a whole night without any proper clothing. He must walk and walk and walk the whole night, and if he falls, he practically dies. And he was able to create forces that he didn't know he had solely by the power of focusing his mind, and eventually survived Auschwitz. This is a big, big, big story. And you said, and maybe you didn't mention it now, so it's a good idea to talk about it also a little bit. Because you mentioned it before that you were suffering from physical damage from not being feeding well when you were a child in the orphanage, right? So you have a lot of problems as a child, physical problems in school. Is that correct?
Oh, my folks enrolled me in Hebrew school. It was a kindergarten, and I failed it. The rabbi and my dad tried to convince me that I didn't fail, that I didn't go with the other kids because of some other reason. But I knew at that point that I was only about 8 years old, but I could tell this wasn't the way it was going. And I felt that I did fail it. And I felt bad about myself. I had a terrible self-image. And my mom hired one of the top pediatrician in Holland, and he told her that what probably happened to me is that because of malnutrition, it might have affected my brain, and I may have trouble learning through my lifetime. And so I grew up with the idea that I wasn't very smart. Matter of fact, just to show you, other people felt that way too. I had a friend of mine sign my annual when you graduate, in your book. He wrote, Arnold, you're about the coolest guy I know. Hope we'll always be friends. You're kind of dumb, but you're still cool.
Amazing. So you were suffering from brain damage from your malnutrition while you were avoiding persecution from the Nazis, and You grow up in LA, right? In teenager, without the ability to study well when people think you're dumb. So what made the change? What made the change? How did you become from someone who people think were kind of dumb to somebody who's managing? We haven't mentioned about $600 million at the moment.
Well, I think what happened, it was an evolution. It didn't happen overnight. But one of the things that I would like to point out to your listeners, anybody who wants to learn these truths, I have actually 3 books, but 2 of them are totally fundamental to this principle. And one of them is written by, under the auspices of Andrew Carnegie,
Dale Carnegie.
yeah, Andrew Carnegie, the incredible steel magnate of the 19th century. And his net worth, I checked his net worth in today's dollars, is $350 billion. Andrew Carnegie's. He is still the richest man ever that lived, next to Elon Musk. And
Before Tesla dropped now. After Tesla's drop, he's still the richest probably ever.
Yeah. So the point is that he commissioned Napoleon Hill. He had a philosophy of the mind, the subconscious mind that he discovered. And he commissioned Napoleon Hill to study it and turn it into a science. And he had him interview 500 of the most successful people at that time.
Think and Grow Rich.
Yes. Now, let me tell you about Think and Grow Rich. It's the 9th most read book in publishing history. Think about that. This is a business book on how to improve your life using the subconscious mind, auto-suggestion, visualization, everything that I'm talking to you about. And that was written.
Arnold, sorry I want to talk a little bit because I want to make it easier for the listeners. Tell us a little bit about you, how you changed yourself. You were a malnutrition kid. People think you were dumb. What makes you didn't go to college? Everyone go to college. What gave you the ability to make such a great change?
Arnold, before you begin, I want to tell people maybe just a short thing you told about in the book. People want to read more about you. William's Green book dedicates quite a bit about you and your story. I think it was there you said a story where when you started learning about investing, you were dating a girl, and you were so intense about studying and so took it upon yourself to work so hard about it that when she offered you on a date, you said, "I can't. I have to study tonight." And she said, "What are you studying for? To be a monk?" That's right? Is that a story that you said? I think was in the book. So I think maybe a short answer you want to tell us more is
well, what happened is I made a goal, and that's what I used to do when I was a rope climber. I made a goal that I climbed so many times, and I practiced my technique, and I would visualize it. In the middle of the night, I would wake up and I was worried about forgetting the technique. So I'd get up in the middle of the night for 3:30 until 4 or 5 o'clock, and I would just practice climbing the rope visually, mentally believing I was going to be a champion. And so I made a goal that I was going to read all the books on the market that I had. I had a whole library, every book I could afford, and I had a goal that I was going to write. It takes about 2.5 minutes a page. 300-page book would take so long. And then I would give myself a goal that every night I would study the book to finish the book at a certain date. So
okay, I'm going to rephrase my question because I don't think I'm able to set it correctly. I'm wondering, where did you get the conviction?
Oh, that's a good.
People usually live up to the expectation of their environment. If you come, you don't have any money, people don't think you're smart, you're not successful, you have a lot of problems. Where did you get the conviction and the belief that you can? How did you make this happen? This is, I think, is an amazing story. I mean, how come? Usually if I see someone grow up such a terrible surroundings, no money, people don't think he's smart, he's not successful with everything, he usually won't believe that he can succeed. He won't have the conviction that he can. What made you get this conviction, this belief?
Okay. That's a great question, and I can answer that question by a simple story. So what happened is I was really excited about the stock market. I wanted to figure it out. I really made a commitment to learn it. And I had difficulty even reading the books at first, but eventually I got to it. But what happened is a friend of mine said, you know, I'm taking a class, and this guy is a genius. He's a broker. He's got a degree in economics. He teaches this class. He said, Arnold, you ought to go with me one night and listen to him. So I thought, great. So I listened to him, and he was very mesmerizing. He had all the formulas written all over the place. And I said, geez, I would love to talk with this guy because maybe he can give me some advice. So you think he'd go to lunch with me? So my buddy asked him, and he had a good friendship with the professor. So the professor agreed to meet with me. So here's this guy. He's been a broker 10 years. He's got a degree in finance and economics. And he's telling me, and he said, I understand you want to be an investment advisor. I said, yes. He said, can you tell me a little bit about your background? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, where did you go to college? I said, oh, I never went to college. He said, you didn't? I said, why not? And I said, well, I wasn't a very good student in high school, and I didn't think I could make it through college, and I wasn't really qualified to go to college anyway. So he said, well, I think you ought to go to college. And I said, what for? And he said, because you need to be trained in all of the different things. And I said, well, what about the subconscious mind? I mean, I'm programming myself, and it has the ability to produce anything I want it to be. And he looks at me like I'm nuts. And so he was very nice, and he was very patient. He said, Arnold, he ended the meeting by saying, Arnold, I know you have your own feelings, but I'm going to tell you something. I have a degree in economics. I'm 10 years in broker, and I don't think I'm qualified to start in the investment business. So I think you need to get into that training. Well, I was very devastated after that meeting. I went home. I was kind of depressed. I took a nap. And then I woke up and I said, wait a minute. Here's this guy that's got everything he needs to be successful, and he doesn't believe he's going to be successful. And that's the reason he isn't. But I know what it takes to be successful because I used the principle to become a successful rope climber. And that's what gave me the confidence that if I was able to achieve what I was able to achieve in rope climbing, that the mind could make me successful in anything that I want to do. And I believe if I told you, well, I wouldn't even tell you what I believe because you think I'm nuts. But the point I'm making is I really believe that I can do anything that I program my mind to do. And I have met every objective that I've set for myself in life by using the subconscious mind. And when you have a quantum computer in between your ears, what else do you need to know?
Well, a lot of people are being very, very influenced by their environment. I mean, when they're underperformers in their investments, they choose to do what everybody else do because they don't want to be different. They don't want to get criticized. When people say to them that they're not smart, so they said when maybe they don't believe it that they're smart. A lot of people don't have that conviction.
Well, let me tell you how to get it. The subconscious mind does not think, it does not act, it does not judge. It is your servant. It'll do anything that you program it to do. If you repeat every day in every way, I'm getting better and better, 30 to 40 times a day, you will start improving in everything you do in your life because you are the programmer of your computer. You have a quantum computer and you are the programmer. And anything that you program into that computer will come about. I'll give you an example. Listen to the advertising business. They use every ploy to impress your subconscious mind. They start this silly commercial and you say, oh, it's BS. That's what they want you to do. You move your conscious mind out of the way, and then they fill you full of their commercial, and it gets into your subconscious mind, and it works. Why do
Oh,
you
you say something very interesting. You say that basically you are always in some kind of a conflict or a fight between other people who want to control your subconscious to yourself that you want the subconscious, that who will be the ruler of the kingdom, who will make the choices, you or the environment's manipulation of you?
You. And that's the key. For example, I'll give you an story about Emile Coué. He was a French pharmacist, and he noticed he had a pharmacy. So he told people at that time, the pharmacist was like the country doctor. If you had a problem with your skin or something, you'd go ask him for a lotion. And he said one thing he learned is that if he really believed in the product, it worked. And if he wasn't too sure about the product, it wouldn't work. So finally, he realized the reason it worked wasn't because of the fact that the product was good, it's because what he believed. So he quit the pharmacy, he started his whole program, started the Nancy School of France, and he started the whole program on auto-suggestion. And he was healing people all over the place. It was an incredible story. And the only thing he did was program their mind. He got them to believe what they do. And so the way you impress the subconscious, look.
But I want to challenge you here. I want to challenge you because we talk about something that is maybe in conflict, and I want to hear your opinion on it. Because at the beginning we said you need to pursue the truth, and the truth is the most important thing. And some people, using your methodology of whatever I believe I can do, maybe disregard the truth. Let's say, I believe I'm beautiful. I believe I'm capable, when the truth is that at the moment you cannot. Or I believe I can heal myself when, in fact, you have a disease. I mean, when does that auto-suggestion becomes deceit, that you deceive yourself? How do you make sure that whatever you do is truth?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you ever met a salesman who lies about his product and they say, he's so full of BS, he believes his own BS. Yeah. That person is very convincing because he's convinced his subconscious mind that what he's selling is a good thing, and that's why he's able to do it. But here's what happens. When you don't treat people good, the universal law adjusts that. And so if you're dishonest with people, eventually it creates problems. And when you lie, you lose the ability to discern the truth. And so you start lying to yourself and you live a whole different life, and then you end up disastrous. So what you have to do is convince yourself that you are entitled, that you're going to live your life the way it should be done. You're going to live by the truth, and you're going to program the subconscious mind as your computer, and you got to be able to tell the truth. Now, here's...
let me translate your answer to make sure if I understand it correctly, translate to my English, not into Hebrew. Basically, what you said, well, it might work that you're programming the subconscious work to do not truthful thing, but the outcome would be very bad.
That's exactly right. That's how it happens. You can do anything you want with the subconscious, but if you do dishonest things, it ends up catching up because you lose the ability to discern the truth, and you lose respect for yourself, and you lose the ability to love. And let me speak another thing to the love. Viktor Frankl was on the same death march as my dad. They didn't know each other, but he had the same epiphany my dad did. He was on the death march, and the guy was marching next to him, and he said, I hope our wives are doing better than we are. He said that got him to thinking about his wife. And the more he thought about his wife, he felt her present there. And he was carrying on a conversation through the death march. And he said, a thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I felt that for the first time in my life, I realized that the single most important thing that a human being can achieve is love. He says, love is the salvation of mankind. And so he discovered by focusing his mind on his wife, he didn't even know whether she was alive. Matter of fact, she wasn't. But he experienced her through that focus. And he discovered that love was the single most important thing. So when you put it all together, you pursue love, you pursue truth, you pursue integrity, you become what you think about. Now, let me give you an example.
Let me summarize it the way I see it. You pursue truth, you pursue love, you'll get result in your investments.
Exactly, because you get good results in your life.
Exactly.
You
Amazing.
know what? I'll give you an example. I have a brother who was a CPA. He was a star student. He was a Phi Beta Kappa at Berkeley. Absolutely brilliant. So when I was starting my business, he said to me one time, I'd like to join your firm and I can help you a lot because I've learned all the things about business. And so I was so excited to get him involved. So we had a client who had a business that was not doing very well. He was a person that ran fire drills. And what he did is he hired firemen to run fire drills for companies to help them get their employees to safety. But the problem was that he paid the firemen too much of the commission. And so they didn't make enough money to run the business. And they were struggling for 5 years working out of a bedroom and they weren't making any money. So I told my brother, why don't we analyze this business and teach him what he needs to do with the margins? And so, my brother helped me a lot with that. That was a great thing. And one day they came in and I spent about 3 hours with them, telling them what we found out and what we have to do. We have to retrain the salespeople to take a less commission, which is not an easy job. You sit in there with 15 firemen telling them you're going to cut their wages, right? So anyway, he said to me afterwards, how much are you going to bill these people after you spent 3 hours with them? I said, oh, Egg, I can't bill these people. They're barely making money. They have a very small account with me. I'm just trying to help them. He said, well, how are you going to make any money? I said, I'm not worried about making the money. I'm trying to help these people. And he said, let me tell you something. I just did your tax return. And I can tell you, I have women who sell real estate part-time who make more money than you do. And you aren't ever going to make it in this business. If you were a lawyer, you would have sent them a big bill, whether you helped them or not. You bill them for your time. And I said, Egg, I'm not interested in being a real estate salesman part-time, and I certainly don't want to be a lawyer. But I can tell you one day that the universe will pay me for doing the right thing. And one of these days, I'm going to make more money than your real estate salesman and your lawyer. And he just looked at me and shook his head. And he said, well, Arnold, I've been meaning to tell you this, but I really don't want to continue working with you because I don't really think you're going to make it. And I said, that's okay. I understand, but I'm moving forward. And, so I really believed that that was going to happen, and it did. And so, and he said, can you imagine if you were in a business class and a professor said, you can go ahead and help somebody and the universe is going to pay you? He says, can you imagine the guy would get laughed out of the room? I said, he may be, but this is what I believe, and that's what I'm going on.
And it worked.
It worked. But
okay, Arnold, we need to start to wrap up because I think maybe it's our longest episode ever. Although
Here in
I think
Israel,
we can
it's
do.
dark already.
Yeah, we see in the background the darkness. So we need to try to wrap up, and it's an amazing. Maybe we'll do a second episode in the future. But I think to summarize everything, it's really, I see really a motive in all your life story as a person and as an investor. The ability to pursue the truth with all your heart, with all the conviction, no matter what the price is. When the price might be even losing your business, but stick to your truth with a great conviction. And to overcome all the cycles when when reality may seem that you're wrong, and to stay true to your principles, and then to see that you're right again and again and again, and eventually create such great results for your clients. I mean, it's an amazing, and comes from your own true story. We haven't covered like bits, small parts of it. We'll put a link in the show notes to your interview with in the podcast with William Green. Many more stories there. I think it is great. Yoav, you didn't talk much during this podcast. You want to give us some words of wisdom for wrapping things up?
Yeah, sure. No, I was listening. So, and I told Arnold off air. I didn't tell you. I think you'd have to. Arnold inspired me in a great way as well. When I wanted to set up my own firm, I don't know if this is public yet, but Arnold, I don't know if you can give us the source, but there's there's a book, an organization called Manual of Ideas, where you were kind enough to give video sessions where you talked about more specifically how you would set up an investment firm for a young manager who wanted to go on his way, and the lessons some of them shared with us today, and that you said there were helped me out, and also and I wanted just to say thank you for coming to our podcast and sharing all this with us, and
Let
you've
me
been a
ask
great
you something,
inspiration.
Yoav. You know, I
Yes,
have an
please.
interesting question to you that I'm thinking about. I mean, starting an investment firm, it's not easy in many, many ways, especially in the times where AI is booming and everybody's paying high prices, and to start in value, it's
And
very
maintaining one.
challenging.
Yeah.
And maintaining, exactly. Seeing Arnold's story of 50 and a half years of all those cycles, how does it make you feel?
I think the investing hardships are nothing, and despite the hardships you've gone through in your personal life, and I'm also a member of my family are Holocaust survivors, and and just I think what we go through is peanuts, and you say in America, right?
No,
What
okay,
you've
of
been through.
course, but from the perspective of managing the business,
Yeah,
about
I think
it
everybody says,
gives you
yeah,
hope it gives you strength to follow the principles of value, although
yes,
sometimes
yes.
it's challenging.
I think it just proves that everybody says this time it's different. They said that's the most expensive statement to say. It's not different. These cycles, like Arnold said, come and go. They've been here for all of Arnold's career and even before that.
We can
And
conclude with the words of Benjamin Graham that we start with: solid investments will generate solid results and will continue to do so without
over
regarding
time.
to external.
And
Ex-
go with your conviction. Like Arnold said, if you
it's
do the right
amazing.
thing, you invest in the right methodology and companies, over time the returns will come.
Okay, Arnold, as we told you in the end of every podcast, we try to give our listeners some life tip, or maybe what do you want to give them?
You mean a philosophical statement?
Yeah, it can be either we can recommend a movie, a restaurant, a place to visit, or an app, whatever you
Yeah,
feel that is.
I'll tell you the three
Okay.
things I would like that would do the most for your listeners,
Hmm.
and which I have dedicated my life to teach, is the first thing is to read the book Think and Grow Rich. It is the 9th most read book in publishing history, and it is by one of the greatest minds in finance, Andrew Carnegie, who promoted this book through Nolan Hill. And I read that book first, and when I first read it, I made a goal to earn $250,000. This was 50 years ago, and that's the equivalent of $2.5 million today. So you can see I didn't believe more than 50% of the book, but now after studying the subconscious, I believe 100%. There's another book, The Genie Within. I really hope that your investors will get this book. I'm not associated with anything I'm talking about financially. These are books I recommend. I know Mr. Carpenter personally. He spent 50 years studying the subconscious mind because he was healed by a healer when he was dying at 8 years old of an incurable heart disease. And he spent 50 years trying to figure out how this guy did it. And he wrote the book, The Genie Within. It's the single best book you can use for practical advice, which is what I'm trying to give you. And I have 750 pages, and that book is as good. I couldn't even write the book as good as it is. There's a third book, Poverty to Power, From Poverty to Power by James Allen. I strongly recommend it. And I can tell you this, there isn't a problem you've ever had or will have where you can't find the answer in the book From Poverty to Power. The guy devoted his whole life to looking for the truth. And he would get up every morning, dedicate himself for 4 hours to meditate. He'd come home and write all his truths. And he wrote every truth that he discovered in his lifetime. And if you want to seek the truth, that's one of the great ways. And that's the best thing I could do. And my goal is to teach these principles because 40 years ago, I came to the conclusion that there is a method to overcome all the problems in life by trusting and believing in the subconscious mind. And if you use that and learn how to program it, I would rather study that right now than the market because it will guide me in what I have to do.
Amazing. Yoav, you have a tip for us?
No,
Pardon
I
me?
think just I don't know. My tip would just be listen to Arnold and everybody have a Arnold. It's Purim now in Israel and in the whole world.
All right, you know,
Happy Purim.
Arnold gave 3 tips, so it's for the 3 of us. We'll
Exactly.
give our tips next week. So, Arnold, again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. It was an inspiring talk, and you gave us a lot of inspiration. And thank you very much, and keep on doing work. For people who are listening, please, Arnold, how old are you that you can talk so much?
I'm 85.
85, and we
Wow.
haven't mentioned the program. You still do the trampoline every morning for 1 hour?
No, I changed my methodology because my doctors, I don't want to go into it, but
Okay.
the doctor suggested I try something else. So now what I do is I climb stairs. I do 20 to 30 flights a day as a minimum exercise. Plus I do yoga.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you for all our listening. Arnold, thank you very much.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
for
Take
your
care.
time. I appreciate